Chapter 6. The week of Michelle and Seth's honeymoon flew by. Before Michelle knew it, it was time to fly home to Louisiana. She always got sad when it was time to leave. Sure, she was ready to get back to her real life, but she hated to say goodbye to the magical world. Once home, things would get a bit more complicated. They would only have 2 days at home, and then they had to fly to Boston. She definitely wanted to go with him and make the most of their summer together. She also wanted to get to know his friends and see where he'd spent his entire life. When they arrived home on Sunday afternoon, they beat the moving truck with all of his things by about an hour. Michelle was working on getting the laundry going so they'd have clean clothes for their next trip when the moving truck got there, and she had to abandon her task to help get everything settled. He wouldn't need most of his furniture, and really there was no place for it, so she had the men put it into the garage while she went to work putting away his clothes and unpacking the boxes. She was exhausted by the time they went to bed that night, and she settled against the pillows with a sigh. That was a lot of work. Can we go back to Disney now? He looked over at her. How often are you going to ask to go back to Disney? Why? Does it bother you? If it does, I'm going to be bothering you a lot. Not particularly. I'm just asking. Oh, probably every day or two for the next 70 years. Is that too often? I guess not. She moved across the bed and snuggled into his arms. Thanks for humoring me and my Disney addiction. As long as you humor my addiction, I think we'll be good. He kissed her forehead, pulling her even closer. She propped herself on one elbow, looking down at him. Oh? And what addiction is that? You. She shook her head but managed to catch herself before she argued with him. That I can do. Asterisk. They flew out Tuesday morning for Boston, and she was surprised at how nervous she was. They were in the air, and she was getting more nervous by the minute. What if your friends and family hate me? He raised an eyebrow. How could anyone hate you? They'll be thrilled that I care about you, and that'll be enough. I don't know. I've heard terrible things about mothers-in-law. Will she be mad we're not staying with her? She was nervous enough about meeting her new mother-in-law that she wasn't sure how she'd handle it if she met an angry in-law. Not at all. She's downsized to a 1-bedroom apartment since I went off to college. There's no room for us. She'd be the first to tell me to go stay with Daniel. When he spoke about his mother, he had a slight grin on his face. She must mean more to him than he admitted. How long has she been a single mom? He'd mentioned once that it had been just him, his twin brother, and his mother most of his life. My dad died when I was 10, but she was a single mom for a long time before that. They divorced? He shook his head. No, he was just never there. He had business trips every week, and he worked on the weekends too. He died of a stroke. I think he just worked so hard it finally killed him. That's really sad. She couldn't imagine losing either of her parents, and thankfully, they were both still very healthy. I never really knew him. He didn't want to continue on the subject, though, so he changed it. I think you're going to love Brenda. I asked for someone just like her, and you're not just like her, but you're just right for me. He caught her hand and brought it to his lips. She blushed. Do you really think so? She'd never felt like she was just right for anything or anyone. It was good to hear someone disagreed with her assessment of herself. He nodded. Truly. I can't imagine being happy with anyone else. Michelle didn't comment on that, feeling that he must just be humoring her. She had always considered herself completely unlovable. She couldn't tell him that, though, so she changed the subject. Tell me about her. Seth looked at her for a moment before answering, trying to figure out what he'd said that bothered her. She got a look when she was upset, and she already had it. He couldn't imagine what he'd said or done wrong, though. She's a caring little thing. Very family-focused. She holds premature babies in a hospital as a community service. Oh, that's so sweet. I've heard about that and thought about it, but I'm so busy during the school year that I want my free time during the summers. I guess I'm too selfish. He shook his head. You need to recharge during the summer so you can give so much of yourself during the school year. You think? She liked his theory, but she didn't know if he was right or not. I do. It sounds like you work so many hours that you practically run yourself into the ground. No one can keep up that kind of pace forever. Not even you. She sighed. I wish I could. I wish we all could. There's a reason God said to take the seventh day off. Working 6 days in a row is more than enough for anyone. She nodded. You're probably right. I hope I'm not too much extra to add to your schedule once August rolls around. I worry that I'll take up too much of your time. No way. I just hope I have enough time for you to give you the attention you deserve. If I don't, I'll make it up during the summers. He laughed. Are we both always going to want to give so much? This marriage thing isn't going to be too hard with the way we work together, is it? She shook her head. Not at all. I hope we can both continue to put the other first. Of course, during school, I put my students first. That may mean staying late with a student in crisis. It will mean constant ball games and track meets and debate team meetings. I'll go to what I can with you. We'll have date nights with your school obligations. She laughed, assuming he was joking. Yeah, we'll go to a high school football game instead of going to a nice restaurant. Who needs to go to a professional play when you can go to one put on by a high school of 120 students? It'll be great. It sounds good to me. He shook his head. I don't think you understand how little I care about what we do as long as we get to spend time together. What did I ever do to deserve someone who would be so sweet to me? He grinned, touching her nose with his finger. I think your students would have a long list of wonderful things you've done. The flight attendant stopped with the drink cart, interrupting their conversation. I think you may be right. They seem to have an overinflated opinion of me, she said after the flight attendant had moved on. Are you excited to be going home? He shrugged. I haven't been gone all that long. I guess I'm excited to get to spend some time with my mom and with Daniel. Is Daniel picking us up from the airport? Yeah. He said he and Brenda would both be there. She knew the trip would be a quick one, because they were flying back on Saturday. Are you working for Daniel on this trip? That's part of why we're here. I have a job to do for Daniel's company, and there's a job with one of my old clients here. I don't see a need to get rid of any of the work I built up while I was here. I can always fly in for it. I'm not sure how much demand there will be for my work in Louisiana. She shrugged. We're less than an hour from New Orleans. I'm sure there will be a lot of work to do there. I guess I can start marketing there. I was going to try to concentrate in Hammond. Didn't you say there's a college there? He'd prefer to drive a shorter distance to work in a smaller community. Yeah, I went to school there. I guess it's as good a place as any to start. Will you be renting an office? Or working out of one of the spare rooms? Both of the spare rooms have beds. Would it be a problem for me to transform one of them into an office? It would save me some money. Not at all. We can move the bed out to the garage. I think I need to have a quick garage sale for all of our excess furniture anyway. He nodded. Most of my stuff consists of garage sale finds I got right after college anyway. I never really cared enough to spend a lot of money fixing up my apartment. That's what we'll do then. She rested her head on his shoulder. Do you mind if I sleep for the rest of the flight? I'm tired. He shook his head. He'd noticed already that flights tended to knock her out. You sleep. He kissed the top of her head, watching as her eyes drifted closed. It was hard for him not to watch her sleep all the time, but he didn't want to be that kind of creepy guy. Of course, maybe husbands were allowed to be creepy. Asterisk. Daniel and Brenda met them at baggage claim, and Brenda hugged Michelle as soon as she saw her, while Seth and Daniel talked. "I'm so glad you came with Seth. I can't wait to get to know you better." Michelle smiled. "I've heard a lot of really good things about you. Seth went to Dr. Lachele asking for a wife just like you." Brenda laughed at that. "Seth and I would drive each other crazy in the space of a week." "No, he needs someone more independent than I am." "You don't see yourself as independent?" Brenda shrugged. "I guess I am, but I had no problem quitting my job and not working as soon as I got married." "Well, from what I understand, there was no point at all in you working." "Not financially, there wasn't, and I find I'm really happy doing volunteer work. I might even buy myself a little white tennis outfit and hang out at the country club all day, hitting tennis balls." Michelle laughed at the image that sprang to mind of Brenda doing just that. "Somehow, I can't see that happening." Brenda wrinkled her nose. "It's not me at all. I do not belong in the hoity-toity world of the rich and famous. At all. But you're there anyway." "Nah. Daniel's rich. I just go with him when I have to and pretend I'm supposed to be there." Michelle grinned at that. "Do you think Seth will go to school dances and hang on my arm like a decorative toy?" Brenda giggled. "If he does, you have got to send me video. Daniel would never let him live it down." "I might just do that." The four of them walked out to Daniel's Lincoln Navigator together, and Daniel slid behind the wheel, while Brenda and Michelle got into the back seat. Seth frowned at Brenda. "Are you sure you don't want to sit in front?" "Seth, my legs are a tad bit shorter than yours. There's no need for you to turn into a pretzel, just so I can sit in the front. Besides, I'll enjoy talking to my new friend." Michelle looked over at Brenda as Seth folded himself into the front seat, moving the seat back immediately. "You are rather short." "Rather? Oh, well. I can wear heels anytime I want to." "That's a plus, right?" "I don't have a problem wearing heels. If I thought I was too tall for heels before, one look at Seth told me it would never again be a problem." She shrugged. "Of course, I've never felt like I was too tall for heels. I don't even think I'm average height." Brenda nodded. "That man is tall. Like almost scary tall. It's got to hurt his neck to kiss you." Michelle grinned. "It does. He makes me sit down with him. Or lie down, of course, but Brenda didn't need to hear about that. Michelle was sure her new friend was fully aware of what she did with Seth anyway. "I'm glad you guys are staying with us. We'll have to go shopping tomorrow." Brenda eyed Michelle. "Do you like to shop?" Michelle shrugged. "I'm not a huge shopper, but there are some things I need. I'd like to get new school clothes this summer." She had budgeted a clothing allowance every month since she'd started working, and she'd barely touched it. It would be fun to use that clothing allowance now when she needed it. "Perfect. We'll go into Boston tomorrow and do some shopping. And if you want, I can take you to do all the tourist stuff. I used to work at a little gift shop on the Ocean Walk in Plymouth. Plus there's loads to see in Boston if you're interested." "Oh, so I could see Plymouth Rock? I guess I didn't realize it was so close to Boston." "Yes, it's not far at all. Would you like to go there? You could get something touristy and wear a lobster hat." Michelle laughed at the idea. "My students would love to see a picture of me in a lobster hat when they come back to school in the fall." Brenda grinned. "I'm sure they would. Do you have that kind of thing in your office?" "I do. It's mostly Disney pictures, because I'm a huge Disney fan, but I get pictures wherever I go and put them up around the office." I have students coming in all the time to just say hi, and they wander around looking at everything. That's neat. I wish my principal had been that way in high school. Your school was probably too big for that. I only have 120 students between 4 grades. Brenda nodded. Oh yeah. My graduating class was 4 times that. That's why it's easy for me to know each of my students personally. And they all know me. Sounds like you've got a good life going there, Mrs. Henderson. Michelle frowned. You know, I'm so used to being Miss Strempel, it's going to be weird to have to ask my students to call me something else. I guess you could keep Strempel as your professional name. I can't see Seth getting upset about that. I don't know about that. I can just change my name. It's no big deal. Are you sure? Because it seems like it is. Seth wanted someone just like you. Would you have kept your maiden name? Brenda laughed. Never. I was happy to change my name, but Seth didn't really want someone just like me. He's told me several times that you were what he was looking for when he went to talk to Dr. Lachele. He just thought I was what he wanted. Seth went to her so she could help him find the right woman for him. You suit him so much better than I ever would. Brenda looked down at her hands for a minute. I don't know that I would have been able to deal with Seth. I'm happy with Daniel. Is there something I don't know about Seth that I should? Michelle asked. You're scaring me a bit here. No, there's nothing wrong with him. Seth never backs down from anything. Daniel and I mesh really well, but when Seth gets in his head that something should be a certain way, it better be that way. He's really rigid in his thinking sometimes. Michelle nodded. I've noticed that. And he gets the weirdest ideas in his head. Most hard-headed man I've ever met. You know what I mean then? I do. At least, I think I do. They pulled up into the driveway then, and Michelle's eyes grew wide. Seth had warned her that Daniel had done very well for himself, and that he was a billionaire, but she was unprepared for the monstrosity of the home in front of them. Wow. Brenda laughed. Imagine pulling up here for the first time and knowing you were going to live there. I can't. Michelle had come from a solid middle-class family. They'd always lived in the same small town, always going to the same small church. She'd known few people out of her class. Even Bob's family had nothing on Daniel. I've never seen anything like it. It's going to be fun having you here. We can swim and hang out in the garden. The yard is so big it has to be called a garden? Well, of course. Both of the women dissolved into giggles, causing Seth to look over his shoulder at them. What's so funny? Michelle shook her head. Nothing that would make sense to anyone else. At her words, Brenda started laughing even harder, holding her side. Daniel shrugged and looked over at Seth. Women can be really strange. I see that. Daniel parked the car and the men went to the back to get the suitcases, while Brenda led Michelle inside. I picked the Rose Room for you. The Rose Room? Your rooms have names? Brenda bit her lip, fighting a laugh. Yes, they do. Don't everyone's? She climbed the stairs and led her new friend to a room at the back of the long hallway. This one here. Last room on the right. Pushing open the door, she let Michelle precede her into the room. Michelle walked in, looking around her. The bed was huge, and there was a private bathroom off of it. Looks good to me, I guess. It seemed the perfect place for newlyweds. Way down the hall from us, so you have a ton of privacy. No one will bother you. Thank you for letting us stay here. It's so much nicer than a hotel, and I'll have a friend to hang out with, Michelle told Brenda, hugging her spontaneously. I really do appreciate it. We're so happy to have you. I hope you thought to bring a swimsuit, but if you didn't, we can get one while we're shopping tomorrow. Seth told me I'd probably need one, so I brought 2. Perfect, Brenda said. We'll go hang out in the pool after supper. On cue, Michelle's stomach rumbled. I do hope it's soon, she said with a laugh. Oh, it is. Mrs. Brinkley always cooks delicious stuff. And it's always ready at precisely 6 in the evening. It's 5 till now. Do I need to dress for dinner? This seems like the kind of place where I should put a ball gown on just to sit at the table. You know, I think Mrs. Brinkley would prefer that, but I'm happy for you to wear jeans and a t-shirt. And you know Daniel won't care. I doubt if he even realizes that you're wearing jeans as it is. He's not one to notice anything any woman wears. Even me. Well, that's sad. Brenda winked. He notices some of the things I wear, of course. Of course. Michelle laughed. Seth notices that kind of thing as well. I'm sure he does. So Seth tells me that you have another friend who was matched through Matchrimony, and that's how you heard about it. Brenda nodded, leading the way out of the room and back down the stairs. A college friend of mine, Lachele, married a pastor and moved to Oklahoma, where he has a congregation. That's wonderful. She's really happy. Although, from what I heard, their honeymoon did not go according to plan. Brenda related the mishaps of the other couple's honeymoon, setting Michelle off in hysterics again. Oh, that's awful. Someone should write a book about that. As long as it's not a romance novel. I don't know how a romance writer could ever delay the sex for that long. Poor Lachele and John. Sounds like it. Michelle smiled when they entered the dining room and she saw that Daniel and Seth were there waiting for them. Michelle sat next to Seth and across from Brenda. Seth was across from Daniel. The room Brenda put us in is beautiful. Thanks for allowing us to stay here, she said to Daniel. Happy to have you. Seth is my best friend. I tend to do whatever he wants me to do. Seth let out a bark of laughter. You don't expect anyone to believe that, do you? Daniel grinned. Hey, she doesn't know me yet. She might believe it. Brenda shook her head. Daniel doesn't do anything just to please someone else. The man in question picked up Brenda's hand, kissing it softly. Except you. Brenda smiled at him, seeming to get lost in his eyes for a moment. Except me. Michelle hoped she and Seth were in love the same way Brenda and Daniel were in a few months, but she knew it was a false hope. No one who wasn't related to her would ever be able to love her unconditionally. She just wasn't the kind of woman people could love. Seth noticed a sad look cross Michelle's face, and he took her hand, squeezing it under the table. Are you okay? She nodded. Of course. I'm just tired from all the travel. It has been kind of whirlwind lately. Don't worry. I don't have to go anywhere for 3 weeks after we get home. That will be nice. Honestly, she didn't care where they were as long as she could be with him. She sighed. She was already in love with him. How was she going to be able to hide it for the next 50 years or so? She didn't want him to think that he had to tell her he loved her back, simply because she couldn't said she loved him. No, she'd be good and hide it from him. Chapter 7. After dinner, Brenda and Michelle went to their respective rooms to change into their swimsuits. Once Michelle was wearing her modest one-piece suit, she pulled a swimsuit cover up over her head. She hated parading around feeling like she was mostly naked. The men had gone to Daniel's study to talk business, so the ladies were on their own. Michelle enjoyed being with Brenda, so she didn't mind. The two went out to the pool and swam for a while, before sinking into the hot tub. Michelle leaned back in the tub and sighed contentedly. I needed this. Brenda nodded. I find I need it most nights. Makes me happy to relax. Seems like the perfect ending to a day to me. Tell me about your school. I know you said it's small. I want to know about your students. Do you have favorites? Michelle smiled. Asking me to pick favorites would be like asking a mother to choose her favorite children. I do have a couple of students that I've grown closer to, but all of them are equal in my eyes. She stared up at the stars for a moment before continuing. There's a group of students, and I've yet to figure out who they are, who wash my car at least once per month. The football team has put together a rotation to mow my lawn, and they won't let me pay them. There are so many things the kids do for me when I'm not expecting it. Oh, that's so sweet. Of course, I go above and beyond for them as well, and I'm sure that's why they do it. Michelle briefly explained about the girls' track team she coached. I ran in college, but just for fitness. I was pudgy when I started my freshman year, and I didn't like it, so I took up running. I never joined a team or anything, I just ran early in the morning before I went to class. I run if there are bears chasing me, Brenda said very seriously. There are bears in this area? Michelle asked, surprised. Nope. And that's why I don't ever run. Michelle laughed. Well, I run. I still run most mornings during the school year, but I run with my track team as well. I go to every single sporting event. That's 4 nights a week, 9 months out of the year. The school district insists that Wednesday nights are kept free for religious activities. I like that rule. I do too, because it gives me a break. I use Wednesday nights to catch up on the sleep I miss the rest of the week. So why did you talk to Dr. Lachele? When my friend Michaela told me what she'd done, I thought she was nuts, but then I found myself doing the same thing a few months later. Michelle frowned, not sure how much of the story Seth would want his friends to know. She wasn't going to lie though. I was engaged for almost 3 years. A couple of months ago, my fiancé asked me to meet him for dinner on a Wednesday night. I tried to talk him out of it, but he said it was urgent. She sighed. He wanted to tell me his mistress was pregnant. He had to marry her to give the baby a name, but he was willing to divorce her once the baby was born so he could marry me. He did not say that to you. Brenda's voice was filled with shock. Oh, he did. I told him I wanted nothing to do with him. Michelle shook her head. The worst part of it was that I was in a restaurant in my town where everyone knows me. I couldn't even throw my drink in his face or stand up and start screaming at him. I had to sit there calmly like I wasn't angry. That's wrong. I called Dr. Lachele the next day. I didn't see a need to lose all the time and money I'd put into my wedding and reception. Or the honeymoon. So I called Dr. Lachele, and she came and did her tests. My stipulation was that I wanted the wedding on the same day I was supposed to marry Bob. Brenda shook her head at that. Please tell me Seth knows about that. If he doesn't, you have to tell him right away. He'll be so angry if he finds out you hid it from him. Michelle sighed. He found out when I had to give my first name and Bob's last name for my reservations at Disney. No way. Oh, yeah. And you're right. He wasn't happy. We talked through it, though, and we're good now. He's pretty stubborn and opinionated, but we were able to finally find common ground there. Wow. I'm surprised he's speaking to you even now. He must really want your marriage to work. We both do. He's a good man. Oh, he is, but he's not the most forgiving man I've ever met. I heard that he dated the same girl all through college, and she broke it off to go to Hollywood to be an actress. Danielle said she called him every day for a year to try to get him to forgive her, but he just kept telling her that she'd made her choice. She wanted a career more than she wanted him. So she needed to keep her career. I heard about the girl, but not about her calling after she got there. Wow. I had no clue. Yeah, so I'm impressed he's forgiven you. He doesn't easily. Michelle frowned. I doubt if he would have forgiven so easily if we hadn't already been married. He made us sleep with the Berlin Wall between us on our honeymoon. The Berlin Wall? At Disney? We made a wall out of pillows in the middle of the bed, and we kept calling it the Berlin Wall. I know, it was silly, but it felt unsurmountable for a while. That sounds just like Seth. I'm glad you two got past it. I'm not going to ask how, because I have a feeling I don't want to know. Michelle's cheeks flamed. She was glad it was too dark to be seen. You probably don't. You were right, Seth said loudly, from the direction of the house. They gave up on swimming and are sitting in the hot tub. Yup. I know my wife. Daniel climbed into the tub beside Brenda. The men had taken time to change into their swim trunks before joining them. Seth climbed in and slid an arm around Michelle's shoulders. Are you having fun? Michelle nodded. I really am. Brenda is a lot of fun to be around. I'm glad. I'll be gone from 7 to 7 tomorrow to work on Daniel's system, and then Thursday I'll work for my other client. Friday we'll head out to see my mom. You're going to need someone to entertain you. Is she expecting us? Michelle wanted to put off meeting his mother. She was surprised at how scared she was about meeting the other woman. What if her new mother-in-law hated her? She is. You don't need to worry, though. She'll love you. Where is your brother? You said you had a twin brother, right? Yeah, I do. Slade is in Dallas-Fort Worth. He's a doctor. Doesn't it bother her that you moved to Louisiana then? He shook his head. Her brothers and sisters all live close. She's a nurse and has worked at the same hospital in Boston for 22 years. No, it doesn't bother her at all. We haven't had a lot of time to spend together since I went off to college anyway. Well, I'm glad to hear she won't resent me for that. Seth laughed at the idea. Daniel, tell Michelle my mother has never held a grudge in her life. Daniel shook his head. From what I can see, the woman is perfect. How she ended up with a headstrong, opinionated idiot like Seth for a kid, I'll never know. He doesn't deserve her. Michelle hid a laugh by coughing. I don't know if I can live up to that kind of perfection. Seth shrugged. She's going to love you just because you're my wife. No one else can give her grandbabies. Does she want grandbabies? No idea. She's been on us to marry, though, so I think she does. She believes you should only nag about one thing at a time, so she's been nagging me about marrying, not about babies. I'm sure we'll find out when we see her, because she'll move on to the next thing to nag about. Why wasn't she at the wedding? He shook his head. I told her too late, and she realized she wouldn't have any time to spend with me if she came. So she stayed home and told me I needed to bring you to meet her as soon as I could. I'm not going to get out of meeting her this trip, am I? Nothing short of a hospitalization would keep me from taking you to her. And if you were hospitalized, I'd just make sure you ended up in the hospital she works at, and you'd meet her there instead. Michelle looked at Brenda, who was watching them closely. I have a feeling I'm not going to get out of going to meet her. I told you he's pig-headed. He's decided you're meeting, and nothing is going to stop it from happening. Seth looked at Brenda, raising one eyebrow. You told my wife I'm pig-headed? Sure. Someone has to list your flaws. Sometimes you seem a bit too perfect. Seth shook his head. I'm not sure I want you two hanging around together after all. That's too bad, Michelle told him, because we're going to shop tomorrow, and she's taking me to Plymouth. I get to see the Rock. It's smaller than you think it is, Seth told her. I don't have any expectations at all, so I'm sure it will be just fine. Don't buy too much garbage. I need new school clothes for this year, she told him. It's either shop here with a friend, or drive into New Orleans to get something decent when I get home. Why do you need new? Michelle shrugged. I've been wearing the clothes I made for myself when I graduated from college for years. I have a savings account for this type of thing, and the clothes are getting threadbare. It's time for new. I didn't know you could sew, he said with surprise. You've only known me for a week. There are lots of things you don't know yet. There are things you don't know about me as well. I know you're pig-headed. What else is there? Seth looked over at Daniel, whose face was lit up with amusement. Do you see what I put up with? If she's like this after a week, how's she going to be acting in a year? Quit bragging. I see you found the right girl for you. No need to rub it in. I found the perfect girl for me, too. And I found mine first. Seth laughed, looking down at Michelle. If only she weren't so tiny. I feel like she'd fit in my pocket. Imagine if you'd really gotten a girl just like Brenda. You'd never be able to find her in a crowd, because she's so darn short. Brenda folded her arms over her chest. Let's not bring Brenda into this. I'm the perfect size for a Brenda, and that's what really matters. Whatever you say, Daniel said, obviously placating her. Don't you start with me, Daniel Axford. I'm not afraid to kick you. Daniel looked over at Seth. Someday she'll realize that being kicked with teeny tiny little feet really doesn't hurt. Until then, I'll act like it's a real threat. Seth laughed, shaking his head. You two are a mess. How do you manage to get along without me here to run interference? We get along just fine, thank you very much. Daniel put his arm around Brenda's shoulders, not moving an inch, even when she pushed him with all her strength. I think I'm going to have to be mad at you for a while, Brenda told her husband. You do that. Let me know when you're done being mad, so I know when it's safe. Daniel rolled his eyes as he said it. Brenda looked at her husband. And you know it's not safe, because I'm tiny but fierce, right? And don't you dare call me a hobbit, or I will kick you. Sure. That's exactly what I meant. Brenda glared at him, but she didn't say anything else, leading Michelle to believe that Daniel had a fight coming later. Michelle yawned, resting her head sleepily on Seth's shoulder. All this travel really is getting to me. I'm not a night person anyway. Seth wrapped his arm around her, holding her against him. Maybe we should head to bed. Michelle shook her head. I'm not going to be a party pooper. You stay down here. I'll go on up. Not a chance. I have to be up early, and I'm not much of a morning person. I need to hit the hay, or the boss man will yell at me tomorrow. Michelle looked at Daniel. Do you yell? He didn't seem like the type to have to raise his voice. He was just a natural leader. Rarely. I don't have to. I keep my voice quiet, and they all know it's time to run for cover. Brenda nodded emphatically. He has the meanest whisper you've ever heard. Daniel didn't respond to his wife's comment. He obviously found her ridiculous. Michelle stood up from the water, patting herself dry with the towel Brenda had given her before coming outside. Seth got out as well. I'll see you in the morning. I assume you're going in with me at 7. Daniel nodded. Of course. I wouldn't let you take my car. I've seen you drive. You have 4 cars. You could loan me one of the others. I repeat. I've seen you drive. Seth looked at Michelle. I don't know why we've been friends for so long. You'd think I'd have buried his body at sea by now, wouldn't you? Michelle refused to get into that. Good night, she called to Brenda and Daniel as she headed for the house. You could have defended me there, Seth said as he opened the back door for her. I could have. You're as bad as they are, he complained. I thought you were on my side. You are my wife, you know. I'm fully aware. Seth sighed. Why is it that I feel abused by everyone around me? You must have a victim complex, Michelle informed him, refusing to play his games. When they got up to the room, she showered, not wanting to sleep with chlorine on her skin, because often it made her break out when it wasn't washed off immediately. When she was dressed for bed, she walked back into the room to find Seth reading a book in a chair beside the bed. She'd never really been able to read sitting up, preferring to plop down on a bed on her stomach to read. "Your mystery?" He nodded. "I think I know who done it." "I'm sure you do." "Is that meant to be sarcastic?" "I think Daniel's rubbing off on you." "No, it's not meant to be sarcastic, and Daniel hasn't rubbed me even once." She slipped between the sheets, yawning widely. "Are you going to shower before bed?" He nodded. "Yeah. I need to." He put his book down and disappeared into the bathroom. When he came back out 10 minutes later, she was curled on her side with one hand tucked under her cheek, sound asleep. He sighed. She really was exhausted. Asterisk. Brenda and Michelle had a long leisurely breakfast after the men had gone off to work the following morning. "Why didn't the men eat with us?" Michelle asked. "They were in a hurry." "They're always in a hurry." Brenda rolled her eyes. "They do this thing called working for a living." "I don't know why." Michelle grinned. "I guess I'm the same way during the school year." She'd slept till 6 that morning and was quite proud of herself until she remembered she was on East Coast time. It was the same as getting up at 5 at home. "The stores open up at 10, but if we want to do the ocean walk in Plymouth, I think we should do that first. I don't want it to get hot and crowded before we get there." "You know better than I do." "I'll do whatever." "Okay, well, wear something comfortable. Shorts and a tank top are fine. We'll hit the ocean walk, and then go back into Boston for shopping." "What kind of clothes do you want to get for school?" "That'll give me some idea of where to take you." Michelle thought about it for a moment. She'd always worn business suits to work, but she really didn't need to. None of the other principals in the district did. It's just what she had. She liked the idea of dressing a bit more femininely. "I guess business casual is fine. Maybe some slacks and some nice tops. A couple of skirts." She'd worn high heels to work every day for the past 4 years. It would be so nice to be able to wear flats. "Works for me. I have a couple of places in mind. We'll have fun picking stuff out for you." 30 minutes later, they were on their way out the door. Brenda had a small car, which was great for navigating the busy Boston traffic. They chatted while they drove. Brenda told some silly stories about her 2 sisters who both had names similar to hers. "No one could ever remember our names at all. The teachers at school were forever calling me by my older sister's name. Don't name your kids cutesy names like Brenda, Brianna, and Brooke. They won't love you for it." Michelle laughed. "I don't plan on it. I don't have names picked out yet, of course, but I promise not to play the cutesy game." Plymouth was fun for Michelle. She'd grown up close to the ocean, and close to New Orleans, a place of historical significance, but it had nothing on the town where the Mayflower touched down. They strolled through the shops, trying on silly hats, and looking at little mementos of the Pilgrims. "I think I need to get a lobster hat," Michelle announced. "How could you come to Massachusetts and not buy a lobster hat?" Brenda asked, her face perfectly serious. "I really don't know. I couldn't even try." "It would be sacrilegious, wouldn't it?" "Definitely. That one looks great on you." Brenda dug through a bin of silly hats. "I think you should get this turkey hat for Seth. He'd thank you for it. Wouldn't it be fun for us to wear these to some of the games my school plays in? Then the kids could search for the hats, and not our faces. They get so excited when they see me there. That could really be fun." Brenda grinned at Michelle. "Oh, for the first game he goes to with me, we'll have to wear our bride and groom mouse ears from Disney." "Seth didn't really wear those, did he?" "He did. He looked so adorable." Michelle fished her phone out of her purse and quickly flipped through the pictures. "Here, look. We took a selfie with them on. She handed Brenda her camera so she could see the picture they'd taken in front of Cinderella's castle, with the mouse ears on. Brenda laughed. You have got to text that to me. Daniel would get a huge kick out of it. Sure. What's your number? Brenda rattled off her number, and Michelle sent the text. Now we have each other's numbers. I can text you when I get home. Sounds good. I really don't want to lose touch. We won't. I promise. Michelle linked her arm through Brenda's after paying for the silly hats. It was the last shop in Plymouth they wanted to see. Now what? Now on to the serious shopping. Let's go get you some clothes for school this year. Brenda grinned. I bet all the boys in your school have a crush on the principal. Michelle looked at her with shock. No, they don't. You're joking, right? Brenda gaped at her friend. Do you not have any inkling what you look like? They do have mirrors in Louisiana, right? Of course, but I'm just me. I had a friend when I was in college that was overweight in high school, and she lost weight the summer before we started college. For the first 3 years of college, she never had a date, because when guys asked her out she either thought they were making fun of her or pitying her, because she still thought of herself as the overweight teenager she'd been. We finally convinced her that she was pretty, and boys were asking her out because they liked what they saw, but it took forever. That's not what's happening with me, Michelle protested. I dated the same man for 9 years. But did you think he just dated you because he felt sorry for you? Of course not. I don't know why he dated me. It's not like he was faithful anyway. Michelle, you're a beautiful woman. Seth is lucky to have you in his life. I hope you know that. Michelle just shrugged, hoping Brenda would drop the subject. She got into the car and put her bag in the back. How long will it take us to get to the shops in Boston? Brenda looked at her skeptically for a moment, but then she shrugged. Not long. There's this great little Italian place I want to go to for lunch. Are you game? Chapter 8. Michelle had a wonderful day with Brenda, the two of them trying on outfits together and having lunch at the Italian place Brenda had suggested. The Italian food made Michelle's taste buds stand up and do flips, and she knew she'd want to go there every time she was in town, which she now hoped would be quite often. It seemed that every time she made a wonderful new friend, it was someone who lived too far for regular lunches and fun shopping days. After they arrived back at the house, Michelle lugged her bags up the stairs, having a hard time believing she'd purchased 7 bags of new clothing for school. Her students were never going to recognize her. She wasn't sure yet if that was a good thing or a bad thing, but she was sure Seth would approve of the new clothes. She'd been a lot more daring with colors and hadn't stuck to the gray and black suits she usually wore to school. She met up with Brenda a short while later, walking through the garden together. I can't believe how sore shopping all day made me, Michelle complained. As much as I run, it's not fair that I could get sore from walking through stores. Brenda laughed. It's amazing, isn't it? I do better swimming all day than I do shopping. Very crazy. Michelle shook her head. Are we eating later tonight? Because of the men working late? Yeah. Mrs. Brinkley is going to serve supper at 7:30 instead of 6:30. She would never dream of inconveniencing Daniel. Michelle grinned at that. She does seem rather devoted to him. That's putting it very mildly. She thinks he walks on water. Brenda shook her head. Makes me crazy sometimes. I always wonder if she likes me at all or just puts up with me because we're married. Of course, now that I'm pregnant, she's catering to my cravings a bit. I'm sure that's because I'm carrying the prince of her universe. Pregnant? Really? Brenda laughed, patting her stomach, which was still perfectly flat. Really? I found out the day after we got back from your wedding. I'm still having a hard time believing it myself. Do you want a boy or a girl? Brenda shrugged. I'm not terribly picky, but Daniel really wants a boy first. He's determined that he'll need help to protect a daughter's honor. Men are really strange. You know that, don't you? They are. I think our two are a little stranger than most. Brenda sighed. Well, they're both nerds. I think that makes them a little weirder automatically. Sweeter, but weirder too. Michelle looked at her friend. I'm happy for you. Do you and Seth want kids? Brenda asked. Michelle nodded. And I'm 32. I want them right off, because I know I want more than one. I know it's harder to get pregnant as you get older. I'm sure that will make Seth very happy. Yeah, I think so. He keeps telling me he's happy to help me make them. Brenda laughed. Sounds like something Daniel would say. I can see why those two are such good friends. I'm surprised Seth doesn't just work for Daniel full-time. Seth said he was Daniel's first employee. Yeah, Daniel wants Seth to work for him full-time, but Seth won't go for it. He likes having his freedom. I guess I can't complain, because he wouldn't have been as willing to move to Louisiana if he hadn't had his own business. Michelle couldn't imagine living anywhere but Louisiana. She enjoyed visiting other places, but Malloy was her home. Very true. Have you given any thought to moving here? I'm sure there's a school you could work for. Michelle shook her head. I couldn't leave the kids. I love Malloy, and I've lived there my whole life. No, that was one of my stipulations when I went to Dr. Lachele. I needed a man who was willing to move to Louisiana to be near me. I guess you'll just have to visit. Often. And you two are welcome to visit us anytime. I have a spare room. It's nothing like the Rose Room, of course. Well, nothing is. Both dissolved into peals of laughter. I'm so glad you haven't had time to get all rich and snobbish and are willing to talk to the little people like me, Michelle said with a grin. Brenda wrinkled her nose. Can you see me doing that? I'd gouge out my own eyes first. I don't have that kind of personality at all. I know. And that's the reason I can tease you about it. Michelle smiled. So will you raise your baby yourself, or will you have a nanny do it? Brenda laughed out loud at that, a tinkling laughter that filled the garden. I'm sure I'll do most of the work myself. I may hire someone to help on occasion so I can leave and do things I want to do. Like your volunteer work? Oh, for starters. I don't see myself leaving the baby often though. I'm planning to breastfeed, and babies tend to eat pretty often. I've heard that. Brenda grinned. I'm glad we're friends. I was kind of worried when I saw you at the church on your wedding day that you'd be snooty. Most pretty girls are. And that's why I'm not. Michelle couldn't figure out why Brenda kept referring to her as pretty. She understood why Seth did, and knew for him it must be motivated by a desire for sex. Brenda got nothing out of it though. You really need to look in a mirror, girl. You're gorgeous. Everyone thinks so. How do you know what everyone thinks? Well, Daniel, Seth, and I think so. Who else matters? Michelle laughed. No one, apparently. You three make up the entire world. Of course we do. Brenda stopped at a wooden swing in the very back of the garden and sat down, patting the spot beside her. Michelle tried to keep a straight face as she realized Brenda's legs didn't reach all the way to the ground, so she sat down and started the swing in motion with one foot. The gardens are beautiful. I think so. It's a wonderful place to live. I can see that. The only thing missing is a body of water back here. The pool is good enough for me, Brenda responded, a faraway grin on her face. And we're sure not far from the nearest ocean. Daniel and I go to the beach often. You do? He seems like such a workaholic. I have a hard time imagining him taking a day off to go. Brenda frowned. We had that problem early in our marriage, but I managed to convince him that taking me to the beach was just as important as working. How'd you do that? Brenda shrugged. I made it clear that if he wanted a marriage, I was happy to have one. If he wanted someone who was just going to be there for sex and have babies, then he'd have to find someone else. Michelle grinned. I'm impressed. He doesn't seem to be easily swayed. Oh, he's not. But he does enjoy sex, and there's only one place he can get it from. That's very true. Unless he wants to pay a whole lot of alimony, that is. He doesn't. Brenda smiled. He loves his business, and he has built it from the ground up. I've never seen anyone who works as hard as Daniel. I'm going to convince him to take time off on occasion to come see you guys now. It'd probably be easier if we came here to see you. How long is it safe for you to travel? Oh, I can fly up until the 3rd trimester. I'm healthy. There are no problems with the pregnancy. Every time Brenda mentioned her pregnancy or the baby she carried, she put a hand to her stomach. Michelle thought the action was adorable. Glad to hear it. Michelle rested her head on the back of the swing, enjoy the sunshine on her face. She wasn't much of a sun person, but Massachusetts was a break from the hotter sun of Louisiana. It felt like early spring, not almost summer. Brenda glanced at the display on her phone. We need to get back to the house. It's supper time. Michelle nodded, standing up. I can't believe how tired I am. I may need to go to bed at 8 tonight. Brenda threaded her arm through Michelle's. No one would be offended if you did. What are we doing tomorrow? Michelle asked as they walked toward the house together. Tomorrow is my day to hold babies in the NICU. The hospital always needs extra people. Do you want to join me? Michelle smiled, loving the idea. Yeah, that sounds awesome. I'd love to. As they walked, Brenda explained how it worked. The babies they give us are usually babies of mothers addicted to drugs, so they've been abandoned. Occasionally, we'll be given a baby whose mother finds it a hardship to drive into town every day. They all just need love. I tend to sing to them and hold them. I can do that. Michelle was surprised at how much she looked forward to it. She'd always loved children, but special education had never been her calling. Good. The hospital will be happy with an extra volunteer, even if it's only for one day. When they got to the house, Daniel and Seth were just sitting down at the table. We were getting worried about you too, Seth said, getting back to his feet. Michelle walked to him, kissing him softly. It was the first day they'd spent apart since they'd married. Did you have a good day? Mostly. I got what I needed to do done without the boss man yelling too much. She sat down beside him, taking his hand in hers. I'm glad you didn't get yelled at. Did you get the shopping you needed to do done? He asked. And then some. Brenda took me to some really nice shops, and I got some good deals. She'd shopped mostly clearance, but she didn't tell him that. She didn't want him to think she needed him to give her money for clothes when she had enough to make it through. Besides, he was going to be doing a lot more traveling for business, and she refused to be a leech on his income. Good. So you won't need to shop as soon as we get back to Louisiana. She shook her head. No, I won't. I have enough clothes to make it through the school year with no problem. Unless she got pregnant, of course, but they'd deal with that when they had to. Seth looked over at Daniel. So do I get to borrow a car tomorrow and Friday? Or should I go rent one? Daniel seemed to think hard about the answer. I guess. Just be careful. Seth rolled his eyes. I'll be careful. Wreck one car and the man never forgets it. You wrecked a car with me in it. But it wasn't even my fault. Someone pulled out in front of me. So? You wrecked the car. I thought I was going to die. Daniel laid the back of his hand against his forehead dramatically. You didn't even get a scratch. Seth shook his head at his friend. Why do I even talk to you? Glutton for punishment? Michelle and Brenda laughed at the two of them. I'm not sure why we put up with either of them, Michelle said to Brenda. I dunno. I put up with Daniel, because he's the father of my unborn child. Unless I really was abducted by aliens, and if I was, I'm not admitting it. Seth grinned. Pregnant? That's awesome. Brenda smiled, her face lit up. I'm surprised Daniel didn't tell you. You told me I couldn't tell anyone until you told your mother. Daniel frowned at her. I called her a week ago. Why didn't you tell me that? Daniel asked, looking disgusted. Brenda shrugged. You didn't ask. She paused for a moment, before turning to Daniel fully, putting her fork down. Hey Daniel? Yeah? I told my parents about the baby, and you're now free to tell anyone you want. I'm taking out a skywriter. Be my guest. Brenda resumed eating, acting for all the world like taking a skywriter out to announce a pregnancy was normal. Seth looked at Michelle. When you get pregnant, I won't take out a skywriter. I promise. I think that's tacky. Michelle shrugged. Well, of course it is. But Daniel doesn't seem to do anything halfway. I think he secretly likes tacky. I know he does. Seth shook his head. In college, he had fuzzy dice hanging from his rearview mirror. You'd have thought it was the 70s. So sad. Michelle shook her head. Brenda gave Daniel a pitying look. I'm so glad your taste is better now. And we all know it is, because you married me. Daniel made a face. Yeah, but someone else chose you for me. Wait till you see the clothes I'm buying for the baby. Just don't buy him any red shirt Star Trek uniforms. He doesn't need to die. Daniel frowned. I'll try. It's hard, though, because the red shirts say the funniest stuff. My child will not be your walking talking nerd billboard. Do you hear me, Daniel? Michelle bit her lip to stifle a laugh, and looked at Seth, who was watching her. Whatever she says to Daniel about dressing babies goes double for you, Seth Henderson. Daniel looked at Michelle. You're not already pregnant, are you? Michelle blushed beet red. No, I'm not. I'm just getting it out of the way for the future. Fine, fine, fine. Seth frowned at her. You know I have impeccable taste in clothes. Look at the hat I wore all around Disney. Daniel looked back and forth between Seth and Michelle. Wait. Hat? I need to see this hat. Or photographic evidence thereof. Brenda fished out her phone and showed him the text Michelle had sent her earlier that day. Don't they both look adorable? Daniel's grin spread over his entire face. Henderson, you've got it bad. You posed in front of a Disney castle wearing those ridiculous mouse ears? Why not just let her put a leash around your joystick and lead you around that way? Michelle let out a gasp of surprise, before laughing. Joystick? Seth smiled at Michelle, his lips going to her ear. I hope Mr. Happy brings you plenty of joy. Michelle shook her head, refusing to join in the conversation. I think we need to change the subject. Quickly. She racked her brain for something to change it to. She was not going to calmly discuss penises at the dinner table. I got you a hat while we were in Plymouth today. Seth frowned. A hat? Yes, but nothing like the hat I got you at Disney. I figure you can wear it to the games we go to. I'm intrigued and frightened all at once. Will I like this hat? Oh, of course you will. I wouldn't buy you anything you wouldn't like. Michelle took another bite of her grilled vegetables, a big smile on her face. You're going to adore it. Seth looked at Daniel, his eyes round. Why do I get the feeling I'm going to regret letting her shop with your wife? Daniel shrugged, digging into his own food. Because you're not quite as stupid as you look. Michelle looked at Brenda. Let's never talk to each other the way they do. They sound like they're high schoolers trading insults. Brenda nodded. Dorky high schoolers at that. After dinner, the two men went back to Daniel's office again. What do they do back there? They can't be talking business all that time. Michelle shook her head in disbelief. Oh, they're not. They're playing video games. I guarantee it. Daniel has a video game console in his office? It's the only way he can sneak and play and make me think he's working. He doesn't know I know about it, but I do. When are you going to call him on it? Michelle asked, a sparkle in her eye. Oh, I'll wait until the time is just right, and then I'll say something. He won't know what hit him. Michelle smiled. I do like the way you think. Let's go for a swim. They'll join us, I'm sure. That night, Michelle was happy to just hang out in the pool. She and Brenda swam laps for a while, before they sat on the sides of the pool, with their feet dangling in the warm water. I enjoy your pool and hot tub. You should. They're awesome. I just have a swamp, and I can't swim in it because alligators. Yeah, alligators scare me even more than bears. Maybe if you swam in the swamp, you'd feel the need to run a bit more than you do. Brenda shook her head. Nah. I like not running. I swim for my exercise. More fun and cooler, Michelle said with a nod. I approve. Your approval is all that matters to me. They heard laughter as the men headed out to join them. Daniel made a clean dive into the pool, and as soon as he did, Seth did a cannonball, landing right in front of him. So rude, Daniel said when he came up sputtering. Brenda and Michelle watched the men as they frolicked in the water, pushing and splashing each other as if their lives depended on it. They act like little boys. Are they always this way? Michelle asked. No. Seth is a lot more relaxed since you guys got married. I think he needed to find the right woman for him. Michelle frowned at that. She didn't know if she was the right woman for anyone. She knew no one would ever love her, so she worried that Seth would realize it and hate her eventually. She hoped not, but how could he not realize how unlovable she was eventually? Should we join them? Brenda asked after a long pause. Michelle shook her head. I'm not getting in the middle of that nonsense. What if they turn on me? Brenda laughed. You make a good point, my friend. I have an unborn child to protect. She put her hands down over her belly as if protecting the child. Daniel stopped messing around and rushed to Brenda's side. Are you okay? Is something wrong with the baby? What's happening? Brenda laughed. The baby is fine, and so is his mama. Go back to acting like a child. Why did you grab your stomach then? Are you sure the baby's okay? The sheer panic in Daniel's voice brought tears to Michelle's eyes. Someday she hoped someone would be able to love her that way. She wasn't holding her breath though. I was just playing around. I told Michelle I couldn't get in the water with you too because you might hurt the baby. Daniel's eyes grew wide. I'll stop messing around. I promise. We won't hurt the baby. You can swim. Brenda laughed. That's not what I'm saying. We already swam. I'm good. I was just making a joke. I won't do that again. Daniel frowned. Are you sure? I'm absolutely positive. Go play with your friend. After he'd gone back to swim some more, Brenda looked at Michelle and rolled her eyes. Sometimes, it's hard to believe that anyone can love me that much. But he does. Michelle sighed. I want that someday. I envy you a great deal. And it's not for your pool, hot tub, or huge house. I don't even envy you, Daniel. I envy the way he loves you. I need that in my life. Brenda smiled, putting her hand on Michelle's arm. You get the same from Seth. You just don't see it yet. I promise you, he feels the same way about you that Daniel does about me. Michelle shook her head, feeling a tear prick her eye. She wished her friend was right with everything inside her, but she knew better. Chapter 9. On Friday morning, Seth drove Michelle to his mother's apartment in Boston. It was in a quiet little community. She's lived here for about 15 years, he told Michelle as they climbed the stairs to the second-story apartment. Michelle gripped his hand tightly while he knocked on the door, more nervous than she'd been walking down the aisle toward Seth. She took breaths slowly in through her nose and out through her mouth, trying to calm herself. She had no idea what to expect, and that made it so much harder for her. When the door was opened, Michelle stared at the tall, smiling woman on the other side. Seth. Mrs. Henderson grabbed her son in a hug, holding him against her, before she turned her attention to Michelle. And you must be Michelle. It's nice to meet you, Mrs. Henderson. Oh, call me Judy. Mrs. Henderson was my mother-in-law. She opened the door wider, inviting them both inside. I'm so happy to finally meet you. I'm sorry I couldn't make it down for the wedding, but it would have been hard to get someone to cover my shift at the last minute. Seth told me you're a nurse. Judy nodded. I'm an oncology nurse at a local hospital. I get to know my patients, because they tend to be in and out of the hospital. It must be hard when you lose them. Michelle had lost one student to a car accident in her first year as principal, and she could still feel the grief that had surrounded the entire school. She wasn't sure if it was worse to lose someone to a long, slow death or one that was completely unexpected. It is harder than I can describe. But each one leaves something of himself behind. I wouldn't trade jobs for anything in the world. Judy waved Seth and Michelle toward the couch. Sit down. What do you do, Michelle? I'm a high school principal in a tiny little town in Louisiana. I've never been to Louisiana. Do you like it there? Michelle shrugged. It's all I've ever known. I love my students, and my little school. I have a great family that I live very close to. It's a wonderful place. She was fully aware of the flaws of her state, and especially of the education system, but she couldn't imagine living anywhere else. Is it really as wild as people read about during Mardi Gras? Yes. I've never actually been to New Orleans for Mardi Gras, though. My little town has its own parade, on a much smaller and less debauched scale, and I attend every year. Usually it's a couple of my students serving as king and queen of the parade. Maybe I'll try to come down for your little town's parade this year. Would that be all right? Judy asked Michelle. Oh, yes, ma'am. Of course it would. We have a spare room you could use. I'd love to get to know you better. Judy laughed. I'm a mother-in-law. Of course you don't want to know me better. Michelle smiled at that. But I do. I look forward to you visiting. Seth looked at Michelle. You said that without looking like you wanted to throw up. I'm really impressed. Judy looked at her son. Behave yourself. I remember meeting my mother-in-law for the first time, and your sarcasm will only make things worse. She hovered in the doorway. Can I get you something to drink? Iced tea? Water? Milk? Pepsi? Michelle smiled. I'd love some iced tea if you don't mind. I only have sweet. Is that a problem? That's the only way I like it, Michelle responded with a smile. Me too, Mom, Seth said. As soon as his mother left for the kitchen, he took her hand in his. See, she's not scary at all. Michelle shook her head. Not yet. From the other room, Judy called, when are you two going to start a family? I'm not getting any younger, and I sure want to be young enough to enjoy my grandbabies. He looked at Michelle and made a face. Now we know. That's the new thing she'll nag about, he said in a loud whisper. Michelle elbowed him in the side. I'd like children right away, she called back to the kitchen. Oh, good. I'd like half a dozen or so grandkids. I wanted that many children, but unfortunately, I was only able to get pregnant the once. At least I got two for the price of one. Judy came back into the room carrying 2 glasses of iced tea, giving one to each. Seth, move over to the other chair. I want to sit with Michelle. Seth gave his mother a wary look. Why? He didn't trust her at all. Just move. Judy gave him a mom look that made him get up from his chair. Michelle did her best not to laugh. His mother was one of the tallest women she'd ever met, but still Seth towered over her by 5 inches. She loved when grown men were cowed by their mothers. It made her have a great deal of respect for the women. Seth moved into the chair, watching his mother warily. Why did I move, Mom? Judy pulled a photo album from the coffee table and put it between her and Michelle. I thought you'd want to look at his awkward adolescent photos and all his naked baby pictures. Michelle stifled a laugh. Oh, sure. I'd love to. She flipped through the album, laughing at pictures of Seth in a basketball uniform and the running commentary Judy gave her. In more than half of the pictures, there was another little boy with him, one who looked nothing like him. In their graduation photo, Slade, the twin, appeared to be at least 3 inches shorter than Seth. Seth was always the center on the basketball team, because he was the tallest boy in school. He couldn't make a basket to save his life, though. He was just good at tipping the ball toward his teammates. Really? Michelle asked, glancing up at Seth, who was spending a great deal of time studying his fingernails. Why didn't your brother come to the wedding? Seth sighed. He planned to make the 8-hour drive down from Texas for the day, but he had a difficult delivery the night before and was sure he'd wreck if he tried to drive. Such is the life when you have a doctor for a brother. Judy smiled when Michelle turned another page. You should have seen Seth's girlfriend when he was in high school. She was just awful. She was going through that goth thing that so many girls did back then. She wore black lipstick and a black formal gown to prom. I swear she looked like she was going to a funeral. Or already dead. One of those. Michelle flipped the page again to see the girl Judy had been talking about. Seth had his hair spiked all over his head and wore a nice tuxedo. The girl on his arm was glaring at the camera. What was her name? No idea, Seth responded. I barely remember her. You dated her for 4 years. Judy protested. You'd come home with black lipstick all over you. Seth blushed. I did not. Stop it, Mom. Michelle tried her best not to laugh. She'd have been mortified if her mother was telling all of her secrets that way, but it was amusing since it was Seth's secrets being shared. Let's call her Elvira, mistress of the night. Seth threw his hands up in the air. He knew when he was outnumbered. I was hoping you two would get along, but not this well, he said with a frown. He'd never envisioned his mother sharing photos of him this way. She'd never done it with any of his girlfriends, but come to think of it, she'd made it clear she never liked any of them. Judy laughed, turning the page. You'll survive. By the time they left several hours later, Michelle felt as if she knew Judy much better. I can't wait for you to come and visit us in Louisiana. I'll send you the dates we have off school for Mardi Gras. Wait, they give you time off school for Mardi Gras? Judy asked, obviously surprised. Michelle grinned. We get more time for Mardi Gras than we get for Thanksgiving. A full 3 days. The Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday of Fat Tuesday week. Why do you have Wednesday off? I would think the festivities would be over on Tuesday. Oh, they are. Too many hangovers on Wednesday for anyone to actually work or go to school. Michelle shook her head. It had never made much sense to her either. Judy blinked a couple of times. Interesting culture. I've always thought so. Michelle hugged her new mother-in-law. Thanks for being wonderful. Oh, you're the keeper of my son and grandbabies. I know better than to make you angry. Michelle laughed as they left, walking down the stairs beside Seth. I like your mom. She likes you too. A little too much, I fear. Michelle laughed. Are you and Slade a lot alike? It's weird knowing there's another of you out there. He shook his head. Not really. Slade was a lot more studious than I was, if you can believe that. I got into being a video game nerd, but he excelled at school. I played Mario while he was in the chess club. That kind of thing. We were always close, though. It was so weird when we went off to different colleges. We haven't had much time together since. I still miss him sometimes. I'd miss my sister if we lived apart. I've never lived more than a 20-minute drive from her. Makes me sad just thinking about it. It's hard. Michelle saw she was making him sad and changed the subject. Are we going straight back to Daniel's? She asked. He shook his head. I thought I'd take you to my favorite restaurant, and then we could go for a walk through Boston. Maybe pick up a couple of cannoli. I've had cannoli, she responded. I don't like them very much. That's because you've never had Boston cannoli. I promise you, you're going to adore it. All right, she responded with a shrug. She was happy to just spend time with him. She'd enjoyed the trip, and all the time she'd gotten to spend with Brenda had been fun, but really, she wanted more time with Seth. She'd never seen herself as a clingy woman, but she was turning into one. She wanted to spend every waking minute in his company. He took her to a nice restaurant, and she felt underdressed in her jeans and tank top. I would have worn one of my new outfits if you'd told me how fancy this place was, she hissed at him. She wanted to hide behind him, but he was dressed no better, wearing a pair of jeans and a t-shirt that featured Donald Duck, calling him the original Angry Bird. No one cares what you're wearing, he responded. This place has the best seafood on the planet. You're going to love it. After they were seated, she looked over her menu. I don't even recognize a lot of these things. What do I want to eat? Try the stuffed lobster tail. It's one of my favorites. She nodded. That's what I'll have then. For a side, go with the risotto. You'll love it. Done. She reached out and took his hand in hers. I really have enjoyed this trip. Thank you for bringing me with you. Could I have forced you to stay at home? I got the impression you were coming whether I liked it or not. She made a face at him. That's not true. I have to admit I am used to being in charge now. It's odd to share decisions with someone. He smiled at that. I've been working for myself since college. I know exactly what you mean. Think we can manage? He nodded. I think we can handle anything if we do it together. The waiter came to their table then, and they placed their orders. Once he was gone, Michelle brought something up. I've been thinking, and I want your opinion. If you feel strongly one way or the other, I won't argue on it. Seth raised an eyebrow. I rarely like conversations that start that way. Michelle sighed. No one does. She looked down at her hands for a moment, trying to get the courage to bring up the topic. I'm thinking about keeping my maiden name professionally. I'd change it legally, and use it for everything but my work. He studied her for a moment. And you think that'll bother me? She shrugged. I don't know if it will or not. It would have made Bob spitting mad. So you'd have changed your name for Bob? And not for me? She shook her head. I'm honestly more willing to take your name than I was his. That makes no sense at all. I'm not sure if I can explain it well. Bob expected me to take his name, and would have been angry if I didn't, so I didn't want to. You, however, aren't anything like him, for which I thank God daily. Because you wouldn't try to force me to take your name, I'm more willing to do it. Does that make sense? Seth nodded slowly. I guess it does. It made woman sense to him, meaning it seemed to be something a woman would come up with, but it didn't follow good logic to him. I don't care if you change your name professionally. You worked hard to get your degrees, and you got them as Lachele Strempel. I don't need you to change your name to Henderson so people will know you're my wife. It really wouldn't bother you? She asked. I still haven't decided either way, but I wanted you to at least have some input. He shrugged. It's completely your decision. I could argue for either side, but I won't feel like less of a man if you keep your maiden name. Thank you. What are you thanking me for? He asked, slightly confused. For not trying to control me or tell me how to do things. For accepting that I have a brain in my head. For treating me as an equal. She could go on for hours. She'd thought the way Bob had treated her was normal, because he was her only real relationship. He'd said that people don't really act the way they did in romance novels, and she needed to get over thinking they would. The more you say things like that, the more I want to meet Bob. I want to wrap my hands around his neck. Lachele laughed. He's not worth the effort. Besides, he's married to Angela now, and I'm sure they're having fun picking out a nice nursery. She was so glad it was Angela and not her. I'm so glad he was an ass, and you didn't marry him. She blinked a few times. I guess that's good? It is. If you'd married him, you never could have married me, and let's face it. We belong together. Dr. Lachele thinks so, and I know so. We really are good together. We are. We make a good team. He nodded. I'm glad you were the one she picked out for me. Really? She still had a hard time believing anyone would prefer her over another woman. Look at Bob. He'd been engaged to her for years while having sex with someone else. Why hadn't she been special enough to wait for? Really? I hope you know that I never would have betrayed you like Bob did. In the same position, if you'd told me you wanted to wait till we were married for sex, I would have just made the wedding come sooner. I wanted to have a faster wedding, but Bob insisted everything needed to be perfect. He said that doing it quickly would never be good enough, because our wedding needed to be the social event of the year. Why? He asked. Because that's what his mother wanted. She was awful. The first time I met her, she told me I'd have to take lessons in the proper managing of a household, and she hoped I planned to give up my little hobby as soon as I married. You know, my little hobby that I went to school for 6 years for, being a high school principal. He rolled his eyes. No wonder you were nervous about meeting my mother. She sounds like a real piece of work. I'd like to wrap my fingers around her throat as well. How about Bob's dad? You might as well just kill off the whole family. You have a point there. I probably should. Their food came then, and Lachele looked at the stuffed lobster tail, curiously. She had no idea what it really was, but she trusted him. She took a small bite of the delicacy, and sighed in contentment. That's delicious. He grinned. I knew you'd like that. He'd gotten the same thing for himself and forked up a big bite of the cheese risotto. Mom obviously loves the idea of you being the mother of her grandchildren. I have a feeling that your mother would have loved anyone you brought to her who was willing to give birth to her grandchildren. He chuckled at that. You might be right, but she really liked you. I could tell. I really liked her too. I feel like I was silly for being so nervous about meeting her. She's an incredible woman. She is. She gave up her career when she married my father, but after his death, she had to go back to work. She never once complained when we had to move to a smaller house or she had to work double shifts. She just found a way to make it work. I have a ton of respect for her." He shook his head. "She had to see both Slade and I through high school. It would have been bad enough with one son, but two of us really kept her on her toes. It sounds to me like she's earned it." "She has. More than any other woman I know." He smiled. "What about your mom? I know I met her briefly at the reception, but did she work? Or was she a stay-at-home mom?" "She always worked for the school. She was the secretary. She took that job because it meant she had the same holidays that my sister and I did." "Oh, that's perfect." Michelle nodded. "It worked out very well for us. There was no daycare necessary, because she started doing it when my younger sister was school age." "What does your dad do?" "He's an engineer. Works for the city of Malloy." "So he was the primary breadwinner?" "Definitely. Mom's income was extra. She'd put it in savings every month, and we'd take family vacations on it, or that's where money for special outfits or dresses came from. Anything beyond our daily needs came from Mom's little savings account. We were really blessed. And we had her home with us every summer, running us wherever we wanted to go." "What did you do in the summers?" "When I was in high school, I volunteered at our local library. It gave me an excuse to be around books all the time." She got a faraway look, thinking of those glorious summer days spent with all the books she could possibly dream of reading. "Did you read romance novels in high school?" he asked, a grin on his face. She shook her head. "No, when I was in high school, I read all the great works of literature, thinking it made me superior to everyone else. I got addicted to romance novels, thanks to one of my college roommates. We still recommend books to each other all the time." He grinned at that. "It sounds like you made some wonderful friends in college." "I did. I made good friends in high school as well, but it was different. Most of the girls in my high school, which is the school I'm now principal of, were planning to marry as young as they possibly could. 23 was an old maid. Once I was in college, I met a different kind of girl. Ones who cared more about getting an education and building a career than settling down to have families." She shrugged. "Of course, I always wanted a family as well, but I wanted it in conjunction with a career, not just a family." "I can understand that. I hope you know I'll never ask you to stop working." "Good, because I don't see it happening. I enjoy what I do too much. I would feel like I was abandoning my students. I admire your dedication to them." He took another bite of his food. "But to get back to how we started this whole thing. You can work as Miss Strempel or Mrs. Henderson, whichever makes you happy." She smiled, knowing then she'd take his name. Having the option to keep her own was what was really important to her. "Thank you for being so understanding. I married you knowing that we would have little things like that to work out. You were a stranger to me, so I've had an open mind about everything since day one. Well, except maybe about going to a honeymoon you'd planned with another man." He frowned at that. He hated that he'd gotten so angry with her, but it had really thrown him for a loop. "Are you still upset over that? I thought we'd worked it out." "We have. It just still feels weird. I understand now that you didn't really have feelings for him, but still, it was a blow to realize you'd planned everything with him in mind. He could have been the man wearing the tuxedo mouse ears, and not me." "Oh, the horror." Michelle grinned, but at the same time, it would have been awful if Bob had been her groom and not Seth. She loved the man across from her with every fiber of her being, and it had taken only a couple of weeks for it to happen. She'd dated Bob for almost a decade, and had never felt anything but relief when he left her at the end of a date. "I think it would have been awful." How would I have looked with another woman in mouse ears hanging on my arm? Terrible, I tell you. She giggled. I can just imagine Elvira wearing the bride mouse ears and holding on to you. I wonder if she would have worn white lipstick instead of black. Elvira, he asked, a frown on his face. After a moment, he understood. Oh, you mean Tiffany. Yeah, that never would have worked out. She was so depressing. I'm sure. Michelle shook her head, trying to come to grips with the girl in the photos being named Tiffany. The name was entirely too sweet and nice for her. He shook his head at her. Nope, God and Dr. Lachele brought the perfect woman into my world, and I'm glad I have her. God and Dr. Lachele? Are they working as a team now? Sure looks like it from my standpoint. He took her hand and brought it to his lips. Whatever name you go by, you're the woman I want in my life. Michelle sighed. It was sweet of him to say, but she knew he had to be lying. Thank you. Chapter 10. They flew home Saturday after a tearful goodbye with Daniel and Brenda. The two women couldn't stop the tears as they embraced. Come see us, Michelle said while Daniel and Seth looked on, shaking their heads. Brenda sniffed. We will. Hopefully at least once before school starts. We'll come back and see you as well, Michelle told her friend. I can't meet someone I connect with so well and then never see her again. There's always Skype, Seth offered helpfully. Both women glared at him in unison, saying, it's not the same. At their united words, Brenda and Michelle looked at each other and laughed. We'll come back soon. Michelle hugged Brenda one last time before they headed into the airport. As they walked away, Seth said, I guess I should have seen that coming. What? Michelle asked. You and Brenda hitting it off like that. Why do you say that? You both have kind hearts. I'm not surprised you became so close so quickly. Well, we'll just have to visit often, Michelle insisted. At least every summer. So every summer we need to go to both Disney World and Boston? Our travel budget is going to be outrageous. I refuse to worry about that right now. Asterisk. They attended the church where they'd been married together the following morning, and Michelle enjoyed introducing Seth to her family and friends. We've been invited to Sunday lunch at my parents' house, she told him in a whisper. Do you want to go, or should I make our excuses? Oh, I don't mind, he told her. Your father probably wants to spend a little time with me to get to know me better. Any man would want to know who was taking his daughter to bed every night. She wrinkled her nose at him. I'm sure Daddy thinks I'm still a virgin. We're going to leave it that way. Seth rolled his eyes. Whatever. The lunch went well, with her father and Seth getting along beautifully. Her mother pulled her aside as they were clearing the table. He's a really good man. I think Bob breaking it off was one of the best things that ever happened to you. Michelle smiled at that. I think so too. He's been good for me. What she didn't say is that he'd given her a new confidence that she'd never expected. When they got back home, Michelle started on the laundry from their trip. She knew that Seth was going to set up his office the following day, and she wanted to be able to help him as much as possible. After she had the laundry started, she joined him in the living room where he was playing a computer game with his laptop. He put his computer down and invited her to snuggle beside him. I think I like being married. Michelle laughed. I do too. I wasn't sure that I would be able to get used to a stranger touching me so much, but I kind of like it. You like strangers touching you? Should I be worried? He frowned at her. She made a face at him. Not at all. You're not a stranger now, but you were when we married, and it seemed strange. Now it just feels right. She knew she didn't have to tell him how much she enjoyed his touch. It was obvious daily. He shrugged. It feels right because there's love between us now. She blinked a few times in surprise. How did he know she loved him? How did you know I love you? I never said. She'd tried her hardest to hide it from him, because she hadn't wanted him to feel uncomfortable. I wasn't sure of your feelings, he said, a grin on his face. I was referring to my own. She pulled away from him at his words, a frown on her face. What do you mean? I mean that I love you. That's what I was saying. I wasn't trying to tell you that you love me. She got to her feet, shaking her head. I know better. Please don't ever lie to me again. She turned toward the front door, needing to be alone for a little while. I have grocery shopping to do. She plucked her keys off the hook where she always put them upon entering the house and walked out the door, slamming it behind her. When Seth followed her outside, she reversed quickly and left him there, staring after her. How dare he pretend he loves me? He has no right. Seth stood watching her car drive away, wondering what on earth had just happened. He told his wife that he loved her and she accused him of lying and left. What was wrong with her? He walked back into the house and to the bedroom he'd chosen for his office, immediately going to work disassembling the bed. He needed to do something physical to work off his anger, and there was nothing more physical than moving furniture around. Maybe by the time she got back, he'd be a little bit less angry, and he could deal with her calmly and rationally. Maybe. Michelle wanted to throw things. She wanted to have the kind of fit no one had seen from her since she was 3, and her favorite doll had been decapitated by a mean neighbor boy. Miss Strempel. How's married life? A pretty little blonde cheerleader named Lauren bounced over to her in the produce aisle, her mother right behind her. Michelle smiled sweetly. It's good. It's Mrs. Henderson now. Even in her anger, she couldn't ignore the use of her maiden name. She was Seth's wife, and she'd use his name with pride. Did you go to Disney for your honeymoon? Lauren asked. Michelle nodded, wanting nothing but to get away, but knowing she could never be rude to a student that way. Yes, I did. Do you want to see a picture of us there? She took out her phone and flipped through to the selfie of the two of them in their bride and groom mouse ears in front of Cinderella's castle before handing the girl her phone. Lauren giggled. Oh, that's awesome. You look so happy. He must really love you to be willing to wear those mouse ears. Michelle smiled. He's a really good man. I'm a lucky woman. And she realized she believed it. She was very lucky to have been married to such a kind, loving man. So why was she so angry with him? He looks like it. Will he be going to games with you from now on? Of course. Not all of them, because he travels for business sometimes, but he'll come when he can. I bought us special hats to wear for the games this year. Lauren smiled at that, knowing her beloved principal would do something fun. That sounds amazing. She looked over her shoulder to where her mother was picking out produce. You've met my mom, haven't you? Michelle nodded. Your mom and I were in school together. Lauren's mother had been 3 years ahead of Michelle in school, and had gotten married within a month of graduation. Really? She never mentioned that. Lauren turned back to her mother, who was approaching them with her shopping cart. Why didn't you tell me you and Miss Strempel, I mean Mrs. Henderson, went to school together? Lauren's mother frowned. She was a few years behind me, and we didn't exactly run in the same circles. I forgot we went to school together at all. You didn't run in the same circles? Lauren asked. What does that even mean? Michelle smiled. Your mom was a cheerleader, and she hung out with the popular kids. I was a nerd and spent all my time in the library. And Lauren's mother had taken great pains to tease and torment Michelle, something that didn't happen nearly as often under her watch, because she knew what to watch for. You couldn't have been a nerd, Mrs. Henderson. You're the coolest principal ever. I assure you, I was a nerd. Michelle smiled at the very idea that she hadn't been an outcast as a teenager. Lauren's mother smiled. She was a nerd, but your dad and I did go to school with her. It's good to see you, Michelle. You too. I need to hurry and finish shopping, so I can get home. Newlyweds and all. Michelle didn't know why, but being able to say she was married made her feel validated. She rushed through the rest of her shopping and headed home. She had a husband to apologize to. Asterisk. Seth finished taking the bed apart and carried the different pieces into the garage. While he worked, he thought about what had happened with Michelle. When she'd first left, he had been angry, wondering what her problem was, but finally it dawned on him. She didn't think she was worthy of his love. It made him sad, and he started to think about some way he could show her he loved her. His first choice would have been waiting for her naked, but Michelle wouldn't have found that romantic at all. No, she needed some sort of grand gesture, and he would have to figure out exactly how to make it happen. A quick call to Brenda helped a little. Do you know what Michelle's favorite flower is? He asked. He made a second phone call to a local florist, putting his plan into action. It would have to happen the next day, and he'd have to find some way to get her out of the house. He called her mother, knowing that would take care of things. When Michelle arrived home, he acted as if nothing had happened, having her help him carry the dresser from the bedroom out to the garage after she'd put groceries away. I think that spare room is going to be perfect for what I need. Oh good. I was hoping it would. I don't want you to have to waste money on an office when we have plenty of space right here. And then we still have a spare bedroom for guests. She wasn't sure why he was acting like she hadn't been an idiot a couple of hours before, but she was glad. She didn't want to have to try to explain things to him. That night, in his arms, she told him she loved him again, hoping he'd say the words back to her, so she could react appropriately. Instead, he made love to her, making her feel loved, even without the words. Her mother called on Monday morning and asked that she meet her for lunch at the restaurant in town. Mom, I'm a newlywed. I don't want to leave my husband to have lunch with you. Seth waved a hand at her from the table where he was eating breakfast. You go. I need to work all day anyway. Michelle frowned. Seth said to go. I'll see you there at noon. Asterisk. As soon as Michelle left the house, Seth sprang into action. He went to the grocery store and picked up the flowers he'd ordered as well as a few other things he'd need to make his romantic gesture complete. He was waiting in the living room when he heard her pull up and hurried into the bedroom to wait for her reaction to the surprise. Michelle opened the front door and found a trail of yellow tulips leading from the entryway of the house, down the long hallway, and into their bedroom. She grinned, following the beautiful flower path. When she reached her bedroom, she gasped with surprise. There were tulips everywhere, making her smile. And on the bed, spelled out in Hershey's miniatures, was, I love you, Michelle. She grinned, looking around for Seth. When she spotted him, leaning against the wall with his arms folded across his chest, she circled the bed and went to him, leaning forward so her cheek was against his chest. I love you so much. Seth smiled, his arms going around her. I love you too. You believe me now, don't you? She nodded. I realized I was an idiot for getting so upset with you yesterday, but when you didn't mention it, I decided to let it go. What made you realize that I wasn't lying to you? He asked, truly curious about her change of heart. Not that he wasn't thrilled she'd had one. He was simply surprised. I ran into one of my students in the produce section, and she asked if we went to Disney World for our honeymoon. I may have a reputation where the mouse is concerned, she trailed off, a bit embarrassed about her Disney obsession, but really? Why should she be? Grown women could love rodents as well. Right? Yeah, I'm sure you do. Finish the story. Seth rubbed his hands up and down her back, thankful that she believed him. So I showed her the picture of us wearing our mouse ears in front of Cinderella's castle. She waited for his reaction, making sure he knew which picture she meant. Oh, yeah. I remember that picture. Well, she took one look, and her whole face lit up. She said you must love me a lot to be willing to wear those. She looked up at him, loving the look in his brown eyes. That's when I thought maybe you hadn't been lying after all. I know Bob never would have been caught dead in those silly mouse ears, but you put them on every morning for a week to show you cared. You were telling me you loved me every time you put those silly things on your head. She stood on tiptoe and kissed his chin, barely able to reach it. He grinned. I'm so glad you realized it. I also tell you I love you every time I kiss you. He leaned down and pressed his lips to hers. Every time we make love. Every time I ask for your opinion. I do love you, Michelle Strempel. The name is Henderson. Michelle Henderson. He raised an eyebrow. Even professionally? Especially professionally. My students need to know I'm yours. Why didn't you believe me to start with? He asked. She sighed. I believed for years that it's not possible for a man to really love me. Not the kind of love I read about in romance novels, at least. Not the kind of love that would make a man spend the rest of his life with just one woman, loving her and no other. Why? She shrugged. Because no one ever had, I think. I don't know. I was just so convinced of it. There's a line in Cyrano de Bergerac that says, "My friend, I have my bitter days, knowing myself to be so ugly, so alone. I always felt that way." We read Cyrano in high school, and I felt like it fit me well. Like no one would ever be able to look at me with love. I didn't have the big nose, but I felt hideous just the same. So I convinced myself that any man showing me any attention wanted something. They wanted a free tutor. They wanted someone to babysit. Something. I think that's why I went out with Bob. Because I thought I'd never find anyone who cared for me. When he told me he loved me, I never believed him. I thought I should play along though, if I didn't want to spend the rest of my life alone. He shook his head in amazement. Do you want to know what my first thought was when I saw you walking down the aisle toward me? What? That you were the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen, and I couldn't believe you'd had to resort to a matchmaker. I couldn't believe you were really going to be mine. He stroked her cheek with one finger. Michelle, you're an incredible, beautiful woman with a heart for people. How on earth could you think you were unlovable? It broke his heart to realize she didn't think as much of herself as he did of her. She shrugged, looking up into his eyes. I just always thought that. You've convinced me otherwise, though. There's just something about the way you look at me that makes me feel so loved. You are. You are the most loved woman on the planet. Please don't ever forget that. He held her close, kissing her softly. I thank God every day for sending you to me. I love you. More than I could ever say. She sighed contentedly, pulling his head down for another kiss. I love you right back, Seth Henderson. I want to spend the rest of my life loving you. You really don't have a choice, he said with a grin. I'm keeping you. Epilogue. Dr. Lachele pushed end on the call with Michelle Henderson, thrilled to have brought love into another couple's world. She didn't have time to bask in the glory of a good match though. She had received a call from a doctor in Northlake, Texas, who needed a bride. But who to match up with him? She picked up his picture and stared at it for a moment. Who do you need? She asked him. She'd already done his preliminary testing, and she was sure she could place him. Seth's twin brother, a doctor in a suburb of Fort Worth, Texas. I don't think I've found your perfect woman yet, but I will. I promise you, I'll have you married within the next 6 months. Slade Henderson would be her next project. She was sure to find him someone perfect.